And we welcome you back, 93.5 FM, Laramie's home for the holidays. This is the Talk Shop. In Studio 255, I'm Eric Henderson with guests Dr. Kevin Kilty and Brett Glass this morning on the Talk Shop. Hello, sir.
How you doing?
Welcome back. Our third segment, we were going to go into a little bit about another topic here this morning. Take us away.
Well, as people probably have noticed if they looked at the various pieces of my last visit here, I spend a lot of time pondering energy and electrical energy in particular, and where our utility rates are going, and can we make a grid out of renewable energy and so forth. And of course, people who've been watching Wyoming carefully, and this has hit the national news in a couple of places, realize that a judge up in Converse County has vacated the leases on a wind energy project up there on the basis that it wasn't going to be attached to the grid and deliver electrical energy. And he did this on some rather narrow reading in the leases that hinged on the word including. So I decided I would go to Black's Law Dictionary and read about include versus including and see if I agree with Keith Couts or not. I know Keith Couts. I have an enormous regard for
Wyoming's
Keith Couts.
State Attorney General.
He's the State Attorney General, but he was a district judge in Wyoming for a long time also. And in reading that, I realized that had they written the lease, or had they written the law, I guess it is, is at dispute here, saying to include, if they had used the term to include delivery to the grid, that would have been more restrictive than using the word including. Including is often viewed as extensive, and it's used almost similarly to and or in legal documents. And so I kind of agree with Couts that this is problematic because it's all over in Wyoming law, and you have to figure out what the ramifications of this might be. And people also complained, I think, quite a lot that they didn't allow public input at that meeting, but I kind of agree with the governor there. I looked for the meeting and was wondering if there was going to be public input because I was going to attend, and it didn't look like there would be. So I didn't.
If they don't say there's going to be, you can maybe assume that there won't be. But yet, 40 to 50 individuals attended the meeting that you're talking about. And Governor Mark Gordon, it seemed like an awkward situation to be a citizen ignored. And I don't know about the meetings you've attended, but when you call them on Monday, you call and you announce that there's going to be such a meeting, and you have the State Board of Land Commissioners for the state of Wyoming grouped together, and that's a group of Governor Gordon, Secretary of State Gray, and Racine, Meyer, and Degenfelder, I think, is the fifth. And you have that, and you convene the meeting, and in 2 minutes you call roll. One is missing, 4 or 5 are present, and you proceed in the Hirschler Building auditorium, and you proceed with light conversation, but Secretary of State Gray asks if to recognize public in the group will be acknowledged, and it didn't happen, but it was alluded to like it might be before they went to executive session. Brett?
Well, the problem here is that what they needed to discuss, because it was a lawsuit and a judgment, is that this is a matter of law, which means 2 things. First of all, because they're discussing a lawsuit, they're allowed to go to executive session and exclude the public, number 1. Number 2, if the public wants to provide input, it can't really provide it to the land board and get anywhere. It has to provide it to the court. And so these people, if the public, rather than commenting at this meeting, the more appropriate place for them to do it is as amici. When this is challenged by the Attorney General and it goes back to court, then the decision is appealed. So yes, it's true, the public wasn't allowed to speak. It would have been nice, but legally, that really wasn't the place for it. The place for it was going to be the court when there was an appeal.
And within the structs of the meeting itself, that went about 2 minutes 10 seconds before executive session was motioned for, seconded, and voted to go, they did exit for about 40 to 50 minutes. And then upon returning, they resumed with a motion by Kurt Meyer, seconded by, I believe, Racine, and an immediate vote, and wham, that meeting was done. Upon immediately finishing, there was brief comment by Governor Mark Gordon before he turned and exited without even making the time to acknowledge, outside of the meeting, more than 40 individual citizens from around 23 counties of the state of Wyoming in Cheyenne, Wyoming last week. And I think that was most infuriating by the attendees.
You know, right now there is something the equivalent of a gold rush in Wyoming. Wind projects have run into stiff opposition everywhere in the country. Wyoming is still pretty wide open, and there are some big developers who are desperate to get their wind projects going sufficiently by next July so that they can tap into taxpayer subsidies. But just as an example, you know, NextEra is putting together a big project near Chugwater that involves solar, batteries, and wind. And I sent in a limited appearance document to the Industrial Siting Commission on that project. The application for that project was 2,548 pages long. Now, how are citizens going to be able to read a document of that size and make intelligent comment about it, when in fact, if you read through those 2,400 pages, you find out that a lot of it is baloney. It's just an awful lot of padding in there that is an impediment to sound decisions. And one of the things that kept being argued in there is that Wyoming is facing an energy shortcome here in the near future, and this project is vital for Wyoming's energy interests. That is baloney, just complete baloney. No one needs power that's intermittent. That is not what we're short of.
Brett?
Well, we don't, and yet we do. When you think about it, one of the major consumers of electrical energy is air conditioning, which happens to occur during the heat of the day when you could have more solar power, and you may also have more wind. And also, data centers, people tend to make more queries of AI when they're awake during the day, and so there's an argument that there's a fortuitous correspondence between the time when the energy is available and when there's demand. So it's not totally crazy to say let's do solar and wind because they produce more energy when it's needed.
What's the backbone, Dr. Kilty, of all energy? What is depended on to support everything? When one fails, what backs up today's energy?
So let me just respond
to
the comments just made here. Is when energy is needed. As you know, in California, they consume an awful lot of electricity for air conditioning. They need it after the sun goes down. If you look at the way homes are built, that heat of the day diffuses through the walls slowly. And your greatest demand for air conditioning is offset from the heat of the day by
perhaps after 5 o'clock when work's finished.
I'll just give you, and so that is sort of negates some of that. And particularly in the Pacific Corp East balancing area, wind and solar have a tendency to be positively correlated to one another. And so they don't balance one another, which means you got to have some other thing to balance. And people say, well, that will be batteries. We'll just recharge with renewable, and we have batteries, and we can consume those when we need to balance. But people don't understand how expensive that is. That's a stunning expense. batteries or pumped hydro storage. And yeah, Pete Gosar asked me this at one point.
Albany County Commissioner, current?
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
Albany County Commissioner. He said, well, you know what, Pete is firmly of the idea that we've got to reduce CO2. I'll make one argument there. That's a Sisyphean task because we can bankrupt ourselves trying to reduce CO2, and India and China will replace it in a matter of hours. Hours. So I think that's a really poor argument. As I've told you, you know, what would be more damaging, twice or three times the CO2 level we have now, or a world with 8 billion people and no prosperity? I go with the 8 billion people and no prosperity. I think that's a super problem. But so the problem is, and my answer to Pete was, he said, well, what are we going to do? And I said, for the time being, until we can get to where we have reliable nuclear energy that can actually balance wind and solar, because I think I told you in the last segment, not it today,
November
but
5th.
back in November 5th, that nuclear power plants, especially late in their fuel cycle, it's hard to make them giddy up and go. They don't want to follow varying load. They're real good base load systems. And the one in Kemmer has got some interesting design issues to get around that, but they haven't been really proven yet at scale. I just told Pete, we'll just continue to burn coal and natural gas until we have a reliable, dispatchable option in there to balance wind and solar.
Brett, you have a follow-up?
Well, again, I think we need all of the above. I'm discouraged by the fact that the Trump administration tried to cancel grants for wind power and for solar because, yes, storing energy is inefficient. You lose a lot of it when you try to store it. When you do it by pumping water uphill, the way it's done near Niagara Falls in New York, or whether it's done by charging batteries. But it's still something. And of course, the storage that was done for us fortuitously millions of years ago, when solar energy was converted into plants, which was converted into coal, was extremely inefficient as well. And yet it provided us with the fossil fuels that we have now. I say let's do everything we can, because those data centers that are being built right now are sucking a tremendous amount of power. They are causing the cost of electricity to skyrocket, and also of fossil fuels. And if we don't have as much energy as we can get from every possible source, then it's going to hurt. So I really would not discourage any effort, and the effort which was challenged using wind power to generate hydrogen, which could be used as a fuel, I think was a tremendous idea. If we have to change the law to do it, I think maybe our legislature should do that. We'll see how the court case comes out.
Dr. Kilty, you had a point you made about how little the public knows about our utility bills.
Yeah, this is kind of changing the point of view here. I might add that.
Please do.
That
And then
I
if
just
you do.
respond to this a
Yeah.
little bit, and this idea that we should now. You can get away from the intermittency of solar and wind by using it locally to produce a value-added product like hydrogen, let's say. The difficulty that I see there is that will turn loose probably an enormous demand for building locally used energy projects all over the place. And frankly, I hate to think what Wyoming will look like when it's just covered with wind turbines particularly, because Wyoming isn't great for solar energy. We're a little far north and so forth. Southwestern Utah is better.
Out of that, it makes me think of last week's presentation of wind patches that comprise the wind wall. 300 miles of wind wall proposed.
You have got me there. I don't know about.
Essentially,
know about this.
rail tie connects and is adjacent to Chugwater, or and the
Roundhouse.
Cheyenne and the
Roundhouse
and so forth. But that spans in project by project, hundreds here, hundreds there,
Yeah.
thousands spanning 300 of turbine.
Well, as I've pointed out
On the landscape.
in a number of county commissioner meetings, we're getting to the point where people enter southeastern Wyoming and what they see is wind turbines in their visual experience. for hours and hours.
Billboards.
And
And billboards, right?
are there many billboards left
Not
in
as many
Wyoming?
billboards as turbines now.
But at any rate, when people rate what they value in traveling on the surface, especially in tourism, they want to see natural scenes.
Yes.
And wind turbines, and another thing that the developers do is they tell you, oh, these wind turbines aren't going to be noticeable beyond 5 miles. The research there shows that even 400-foot tall wind turbines, which are getting small, by the way, we're looking at stuff that's getting into the 750 feet tall stuff. Those are going to be visible way beyond what people thought earlier, because out here in the West, we got clear air. Our visual experience is limited by the curvature of the earth out here and not much of anything else.
What's the height for lighting requirement before you see red flashing horizon lights?
You know, it seems to me I knew that at one
40
time.
feet for every red and white on a radio tower, red and white section is 40 feet each, I believe. And in that, I don't know how high they are, what the lowest to require that. Brett, do you know?
As far as I know, it's 100 feet for sure, but shorter ones often have lights on them too.
Just for safety.
Yeah.
But I might bring
And
up...
if you're near, and by the way, in Laramie in particular, because we have an airport, and many of the towers are near the airport glide path, you have to have lights on them when they're lower than that.
Very good, very good.
You know, we live in there are two important laws protecting wildlife, and one is the Migratory Bird Act of 1916, I think, maybe it was in 1912, and the other is the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, dates from 1940. And for birds that migrate, and that includes golden eagles, by the way, we're in the Central Flyway, and that has been always extremely important because there weren't many barriers to birds being able to migrate freely in this Central Flyway. So it was used extensively for birds migrating from Western Canada down to Mexico for their snowbirds. They like to go where it's warm. And now we're putting obstacles all over in the Central Flyway. So we'll have to see how that goes. But as Mike Lockhart would say, he's very worried about golden eagles just being wiped out in this area because of wind turbines. Because
how realistic do you believe that is from your personal perspective?
I don't go around looking for dead birds. Mike Lockhart does.
Right.
And I'll take he was doing this for 50 years. I don't know what Mike's current status is. He's been trying to retire. But he says that 46% or something like that of the dead golden eagles have been hit with wind turbine blades. And about 43% are killed by automobiles and electrocution on power lines and hunting. And there's some small mortality because bald eagles and golden eagles don't get along, as you know. But I view these renewable energy. They've got some problems in terms of views and wildlife, and I think the power is pretty lousy. So I don't think we really need it all that badly. But Brent has a good point. The data centers are just mad consumers of power.
Brett Glass, you have a finding on media.
Yes. Yes. Well, I've done a quick search, and definitely, if you have a tower that's 200 feet or more tall, then it definitely needs to be lit. But the FAA requires some shorter ones to be lit, according to my quick search here. As for the height of wind turbines and perhaps making them less unsightly, are you aware of what the local company called Heirloom is doing?
That was the project that was north of Glen Rock, or not Glen Rock, but Rock River, and they had a test site in Carpenter, Wyoming area.
Heirloom, that is a really old idea. I first saw that idea in the first energy crisis in 1973.
You had some of those as students, didn't you?
Well, I had students in mechanical engineering and senior design working with Heirloom themselves,
okay.
themselves on that project. But the idea of Heirloom is an upside-down version of how I first saw this. In the first energy crisis up in Montana, people were proposing building a long, elongated track for railroad rolling stock, carrying generators and airfoils to just be, it was across the prevailing wind, and they would just run them around and around this track and take the electricity off the rails. And nobody bothered with that because it's very expensive. Here's the real problem with heirloom that's almost impossible to overcome. It's down in the low wind speed regime near the ground. The whole point of building bigger and taller wind turbines is you're up in a higher wind speed regime when you get further away from the ground. And the people who build generators have found that they can't make much money building small generators. They want to build big generators, 5-6 megawatts. You got to have a tall turbine to make use of those because you need a very large diameter blade in order to make use of them. Heirloom has that's a real terrible engineering problem for heirloom. And
Yeah, but is it a good compromise? It's lower to the ground, so you don't have huge unsightly towers spoiling your view.
well, there are other engineering issues.
The
with
footprint
system.
seems to be at least one consideration with respect to the heirloom concept.
Yeah, you know what? I haven't delved deeply into it. I just know
Perhaps-
that that's a problem that's difficult to overcome.
Perhaps that's a story that we research and a thought maybe we make in 2026, Brett. Dr. Kilty, any thoughts as we close this segment of our program?
Well, you had asked about
Utility bills and knowledge
and
of,
maybe that's worthy of coming back with some other energy-related topics at another time. So maybe Brent could join us at another time, and we can talk about energy.
Brett, did you have a final question for Dr. Kilty or a topic for us to consider going forward?
Well, yes. The city of Laramie just recently almost considered, but then tabled before it got to council, an increase in what's called the franchise fee, which is really a tax on your natural gas bill, and they were proposing to raise it to the highest amount it's ever been, 2.5% of your entire bill. Now, if you take a good look at your gas bill, what you'll notice is that there isn't regular state sales tax or a regular local sales tax, I should say, on your gas. The amount of tax that's charged on your bill, which says sales tax, is only 4%. So the city doesn't get the usual fifth penny and sixth penny of sales tax on your gas bill, and so they replace this with the franchise tax. So common sense says that should be no more than 2%, or they're taxing energy more than they're taxing other things. They were proposing 2.5%, and they were proposing taxing not only the energy, but also the other fees that went along with your bill. This, again, would be a new record just at the time that the bills were getting higher and higher. So this is going to be a controversy that comes before City Council in 2026, and people are going to discuss what's fair. My personal opinion is that the tax should be per therm used rather than a percentage of your bill, because otherwise you're taxed on things which don't have to do with energy, such as the extra service fees,
The meter and what have
bill,
you.
right? The meter and everything else. But we'll see what happens. Council has to determine this in 2026, and the public should chime in.
What are your thoughts with respect to it being a 25-year agreement, of which we were presented with the idea of change, but only part of the picture? There had been adaptations and some changes in progression from 25 years ago to today. Brett?
Yes, well, actually, the agreement changed radically. Every 5 years, the agreement provided for revisions every 5 years. And those 5 years were done very quietly by council. Those revisions every 5 years were done quietly by council, to the point where the contract looked nothing like the original. And the only way to find out what the contract was at the moment was to go to the city website and to dig down into an appendix to the city ordinances. Hidden there was the current text of the contract. This should be a more transparent process, and it should have more public input. So I'm looking forward to the renegotiating of the contract, which has to be done before July of 2026.
Dr. Kilty, any thoughts?
I really don't. This is out of
I
my
saw you
experience.
chuckling. I just wanted to give you an
Well,
opportunity.
I was just, yeah, Brett's he's an amusing speaker here, and so it's fun to listen to him.
Well, we found the increase is proposed for another 25-year period, which in and of itself, to me, when you're considering a long-range program contract for that period of time, that is more than 2 decades, folks,
Yeah.
and worth more public comment. I think it's insufficient to even expect that 3 minutes per person on a limited percentage of our population that would actually comment on this would even involve themselves in such a thing. So I think the request for engagement of the public should be expanded and broadened. Brett?
Yes, I think it should. Well, I think in general the public should be more involved in city affairs and commenting on what city council does, because far too many things fly under the radar and have flown under the radar in the past year. So yes, we should all get involved in this, and I think it's our responsibility to inform the public through mechanisms like radio and social media. And I think council should do a better job of reaching out to the public on this too, because it matters a lot. Energy is going to be a hot topic this year, especially again with the shortages caused by AI. And we should be involved, and the public should have a voice.
Brett Glass, Dr. Kevin Kilty, myself, Eric Henderson. This has been interesting. We've covered a lot of ground. Dr. Kilty, a final thought as we end our time here.
A final thought on energy, maybe.
Yeah, please.
You were talking about 20-year and 30-year commitments. Look at the electric distribution system. Look at the utility who has to plan. If we're going to put up wind turbines, we expect these to be up there for 20 years.
Yeah.
They go for a certificate of convenience and necessity. That hearing is separate from what it's going to cost the ratepayer to do this. So you now go to that hearing. It would be good to have public input in that hearing, and you get almost none, as you might guess.
Do those handled by statewide or county by county?
No, they're statewide because
Okay.
they're, it's Rocky Mountain Power that'll go in and ask for that. Rocky Mountain Power now owns Rock Creek 1 and 2, which was something that wasn't at all clear when there was a hearing for public convenience and necessity on that wind plant. And then once they got that certificate, then the developer got the certificate, then suddenly Rocky Mountain Power said, oh, by the way, we're going to own this. That's now a 20 or maybe 25-year commitment on the part of the utility. And when you go to set rates, that has to be paid for. And you have to decide how's that going to impact our utility rates. It is devilishly difficult to figure out what impacts what when you get into electric utility rates. Because the utility will say, oh, these are net power costs. What's a net power cost? You now got to dig into that. And you find out it's a dog's breakfast of all kinds of stuff. We paid for the demolition on dams in the Klamath River in Oregon to let the Klamath River flow freely. That ended up in our net power costs. We get things like a Washington state law that penalizes a gas-fired power plant in Washington state that's helping to balance wind and other things there. But Wyoming gets whacked for the penalty, and we're probably not using. Who uses the power on the network is almost impossible to figure out, because what makes an electron wiggle? It's the totality of every generating unit currently delivering to that spot. So, yeah, these are long-range questions, and they deserve more public input. And as he was saying, you got to dig into some file in the municipality to figure out what's going on here. Well, in terms of the electric utility, you got to read documents that are 1,000 pages long to find out really what's going on.
One of the comments you made was with respect to the lack of clarity in 1 and 2 by Pacific Power, and that lack of clarity comes down to a lack of public notice in many cases, doesn't it?
They got reprimanded for that in the 2023 general rate case. Commissioner Throne lambasted them for their lack of public notice there, and I thought those were good points. she made on that. But the real problem is, even if they're pretty clear, it's pretty hard to figure out what's going
Still have
on.
1,000 pages.
Yeah, and in the case of a certificate of convenience and necessity, the decision stemming from that is going to affect rate cases for who knows how long, right? And they're separate from one another. And by the time you get to the rate case, it isn't clear that the necessity and the convenience of that wind plant was really necessary when you see what it may cost you. But sorting that out, very difficult to do.
Part of this morning's broadcast brought to you in part by Chano's Village, the Benton Rusty, and Range Community Insurance, along with Laramie Range Ford. Thank you all for your contributions and support of 93.5 FM, Laramie's home for the holidays.